We're going to be, oh, yeah, we're getting it. We're out on YouTube now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, on YouTube. This is Richard Slezak coming to you from the John Moriarty studio over the voiceofstockton.org and kxvs.org. Going to do a little bit of a reach here. Get it. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And what time do we have? Call it 8:11 started. YouTube. And today is June 16th, 2018. And continuing, let me take down this file on the audition so we can get started there soon. And gonna get this Facebook going up now. And delete. Put up Saturday evening news, and a little bit of a scratch there. All right. Host RichardSlezak, that's me. And from the lower billboard, as you can see, it's on the Poor People's Campaign. Starting broadcast. All right. And let's see, we got now live streaming. Okay, got 8:13 p.m. Started Facebook. And like to get the audition going, and so we can just get right into our show. And okay, today is 2018-06-16, Saturday evening news. And we have 8:14 p.m. about to get started in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Richard Slezak, your host for the Saturday Evening News, coming to you from the John Moriarty studio over the voiceofstockton.org and kxvs.org. Yes, you can be a member here. You can help us serve the community by being a member and being active here at the station. Community radio is back, and you can help out. Check us out, thevoiceofstockton.org, 231 West Bedford Road, and we are seeking sponsors among our members to really get the word out about your business here in Stockton. And our wonderful sponsors are Hotel Furniture Liquidators at 231 West Bedford Road. No, that's 1648 North Shaw Road. Here in Stockton, nearest cross street is East Fremont, east of 99. That's Hotel Furniture Liquidators. The Miracle Mile Bookstore and at 2210 Pacific Avenue, and Doors Book Recyclery, 2310 Pacific Avenue. Fong, too, will buy books from you and sell them. Books for your home, for your friends, for your children, for yourself. And custom plastics and signs. Hey, you need plastics, they got it. Sheets, tubes, rods. You can get corrugated signage. They make it. Stencils, vehicle and boat graphics. T-shirts and business cards printed. They'll fabricate up a display for you or something else. They're at 326 East Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard here in Stockton. That's Custom Plastics and Signs. Millennium Computer Repair, Sarfraz Khan. Mobile for you. He can fix virus and spyware removal, performance enhancement, computer password removal, data backup, hard drive repair. They have parts, and they're on the phone. You can reach them 209-922-1879. That's Millennium Computer Repair at 209-922-1879. Habitat for Humanity Restore, where you can buy HVAC, electrical apparatus, tools, equipment, doors, windows, building supplies. They're at 4933 West Lane. And inventory changes daily, so head on over to 4933 West Lane for the Habitat for Humanity Restore. Tender Donuts, we bake fresh daily. Chan with Sam and Sif Sam at 1504 East Hammer Lane. I have been bad. I haven't had a camera on me. Here I am. And for our YouTube broadcasting. And that might be shifting around. Oh my. Oh, we got a different scene there. Okay. And just keeping the audition and sponsors. Continuing. America's got a lot of problems. 50 years ago, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, do you read me? Oh, wait a minute. I see a problem. Okay, that's a little bit better. Now we're getting something. This is a good microphone. It's especially helpful if it's in the on position on the soundboard. Okay. It's I remember Dr. King. I'm 63 years old, so I'm going to share my recollections with you about Dr. King, and he was a great guy. And so, and the last 2 years of his life, he got more into economic issues, economic reality. The guy, he was the complete opposite of Donald Trump. He was clear, he was accurate, he was truthful, he was faithful. The trouble was he wasn't president. And the Poor People's Campaign is a call for moral revival. We're trying to unite tens of thousands of people across the country to challenge the evils of systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the nation's distorted morality. And there's a joining page that you can join in. On Saturday, June 23rd, we will be headed to the U.S. Capitol for a massive march to fight poverty in Washington, D.C. The rally will begin at 10 a.m. With photos include Reverend Barber with a big ribbon around him, says Jesus was a poor man. Working class. He was a carpenter, learned the carpenter's trade from his father Joseph, for Jesus was Jesus Bar Joseph. That was his Jewish name. And let's get the cameras angled a bit more. Whoop. That ain't so bad. There's a video we could watch. So again, though, we're here at the Poor People's, show subjects is Poor People's Campaign, and we are at .org. So just bringing you the straight stuff, and we're gonna they have about demands, principles, partners, press, themes. So demands and a moral agenda based on fundamental rights. They've reached out to communities in more than 30 states, met with tens of thousands of people, witnessing the strength of their moral courage in trying times. Gathered testimonies from hundreds of poor people. We have chronicled their demands for a better society, following a moral agenda drawn from deep engagement and commitment to these struggles of the poor and dispossessed. An empirical assessment of how we have come to the point today. Souls of Poor Folk. Auditing America report reveals how evils of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, militarism are persistent, pervasive, and perpetuated by a distorted moral narrative that must be challenged. More referring to the Souls of the Poor Folk audit. We're hoping that people will be moved deeply in their conscience to change things. Conscience, people, conscience. We're hoping you have one. Join the ranks of those who are determined not to rest until justice and equality are reality for all. 1. Declaration of Fundamental Rights and Poor People's Moral Agenda. Systemic racism, referencing here to, since 2010, 23 states have passed racist voter suppression laws. Glad they're starting out with this one. Gerrymandering and redistricting. Laws that have made it harder to register. Reduced early voting days and hours, such as the week preceding any election. You might have, you'd be able to vote at the registrars early, and they might stay open an extra hour. Instead of 8 to 5, they'd be open 8 to 6. But, we got to do budget cutbacks, and so they'd only be open 8 to 5. Continuing. There was reduced early voting days and hours, purging voter rolls. That has been done by various methods, but the chief one is the cross-check, and it's 7.5 million names of predominantly American minorities such as Koreans, Chinese, African American, and Latinos. And then various states have adopted it and have purged voters who are registered in 2 states or more of the same first and last name, but no consideration given for middle names. No consideration given for this might be 2 different people. They're purged, ideally, according to that system, invented by Chris Kobach, former Kansas Secretary of State, to get rid of these people who have like a 70% chance of voting Democratic. Can't have that. So, more restrictive voter ID laws that kept 200,000 people from voting on November 8th or earlier. In Wisconsin alone, Shelby County versus Holder Supreme Court case gutted key provisions of the Voting Rights Act. That came in 2013. And 14 states had new voting restrictions in place before the 26th presidential election, and there were 868 fewer polling places across the country. At least 17 states saw voter suppression cases targeting American Indian and Alaskan Native voters in 2016. 13 states had passed voter suppression laws, also opted not to accept expanded Medicaid benefits offered under the Affordable Care Act. So, wow. Oh, my. Don't know exactly what they are right offhand, but that's not good. Those are definitely red states. Now, restricting and curtailing democratic processes by drawing legacies of racism to undermine local efforts to organize for better conditions. 25 states have passed laws that preempt cities from adopting their own local minimum wage laws. Emergency financial management has become a mechanism that effectively nullifies the right to vote to prioritize balanced budgets and repayments to Wall Street lenders over human lives. Non-elected this was done to Flint, real bad, and other cities with large African American populations in the state of Michigan. Non-elected managers were appointed by the governor and granted sweeping powers, including the authority to dismiss elected officials, scrap labor contracts, sell public assets, impose new taxes, without any accountability to the voters. Flint's brought out as an example. 6,100,000 people have been disenfranchised from voting due to felony convictions. Now, here in California, that's part of that population. When you're in prison, once you've been convicted, you can't vote until you've served your time and served your parole. Then you can get reenfranchised to vote. But there are states where that's permanent. That's real bad. As a result, 1 in 13 black adults are disenfranchised. There is a movement afoot here in California, but it would take a constitutional change to allow felons to vote. Goes into attacks on democracy connected to growing anti-immigrant backlash. Undocumented immigrants contributed $5 trillion to the U.S. economy over the past 10 years. They paid $13 billion in Social Security in 2010, but only received $1 billion in benefits. They also pay 8% of their income in state and local taxes, while the wealthiest 1% pay just 5.4%. Undocumented immigrants and most lawfully residing immigrants are barred from receiving assistance under the major public welfare programs, causing hardship for many poor immigrant families. They must be treated with dignity and respect due to all human beings. They should not be used as cover for attacks on democracy. They do strengthen our economy and our communities. Native Americans and Alaskan Natives in the U.S. have been subjugated. From the doctrine of discovery that was used to justify the takeover in indigenous lands, to the ongoing attempt to undermine and constrain tribal sovereignty and authority as independent nations. These people matter. When their political independence is taken, their resources, wealth, and culture are taken as well. Power has taken the form of xenophobia, Islamophobia, a fear of undocumented immigrants, and a continued oppression of First Nations, Native Americans, and Alaskan Natives. We have the right to vote and the right to accountable political representation. So the Poor People's Campaign very much emphasizes political action. Poor people, you need to vote. Oh man, don't be robbed of that power. That's what the Poor People's Campaign is telling you. Poor People's Campaign demands full restoration and expansion of the Voting Rights Act. Let me do a electronics check here. See what's going on the audition and such like. And oh yeah, that's looking real good. See what the radio DJ looks like. Yeah, we're doing fine. 8:33 p.m. here at the Voice of Stockton. And yeah, we're looking good there on the on our Facebook, YouTube. So continuing to march, and yep, get that Voting Rights Act back. End to gerrymandering and redistricting. Early registration of 17 and 18-year-olds. Implementation of automatic registration to vote at the age of 18. Early voting in every state. Same-day registration. Enactment of Election Day as a holiday. And a verifiable paper record. We demand the right to vote for the formerly incarcerated. They demand the removal of emergency financial management of governing. Demand an end to placing persons on the federal bench who have a record of standing against voting rights. Demand statehood, voting rights, and representation to the people of Washington, D.C. Demand a clear and just immigration system that strengthens our democracy through broad participation of everyone in this country. Includes providing timely citizenship process that guarantees the right to vote. Requires protecting immigrants' abilities to organize for their rights in the workplace, in their communities, without fear of retribution, detention, and deportation. This has reared its ugly head many times in American history. A century ago was just such a time. 1919, 1913, oh yeah. The Poor People's Campaign demands that First Nations, Native Americans, and Alaskan Native people retain their tribal recognition as nations, not races, to make a substantive claims to their sovereignty. Power and inequality. In the 1970s, wages for the bottom 80% of workers have remained largely stagnant. Today, there are 64 million people working for less than $15 an hour. I'm one of them. The top 1% share of the economy has nearly doubled to more than 20% of our national income. The 400 wealthiest Americans owned more wealth than the bottom 64% of the entire U.S. population. That's 204 million people. 3 individuals possessed a combined wealth of $248.5 billion, an amount of wealth that's equal to the bottom 50% of our population. Housing, health care, education costs have risen dramatically. 30 years, rents have gone up faster than income in nearly every urban area of the country. In 2016, there was no state or county in the nation where someone earning the federal minimum wage could afford a 2-bedroom apartment at market rent. Only 1 in 4 of those eligible to receive federal housing assistance actually do so. There's a housing crisis with 2.5 to 3.5 million people who are living in shelters, transitional housing centers, and tent cities. That includes veterans, the elderly, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer individuals, children and women, youth. 32 million people lack health insurance. Estimated 40% of Americans have taken on debt because of medical issues, making medical debt the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy filings. The bottom 90% of Americans hold more than 70% of debt in the country. Student debt has grown to $1.34 trillion and affects 44 million Americans. 19% of all U.S. households have zero wealth or negative worth. That is, they owe more than they own. That is with excluding the value of the family car. Social service programs have been restructured to shift critical resources away from the poor. Temporary Assistance to Needy Families program only assists 23% of poor families with children. The current administration, that is the Trumps, has proposed a 30% cut to the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, that's SNAP, a restructuring that would impose onerous work requirements and threaten to destabilize the program. The U.S. Constitution was established to, quote, promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, unquote. Further demands of the Poor People's Campaign, the immediate implementation of federal and state living wage laws that are commensurate for 21st century economy, guaranteed annual incomes, full employment, and the right for all workers to form and join unions. Demand an end to anti-union and anti-workers' rights laws in the states. Equal pay for equal work, fully funded welfare programs for the poor, and an end to the attacks on SNAP, HEAP, and other vital programs for the poor. The National Poor People's Campaign demands equity in education, ensuring every child receives a high-quality, well-funded, diverse public education. Demand an end to the resegregation of schools. Demand free tuition at public colleges and universities and an end to profiteering on student debt. Demand equitable funding for historically black colleges and universities. Demand the expansion of Medicaid in every state and the protection of Medicare and single-payer universal health care for all. Demand fully funded public resources and access to mental health professionals and addiction and recovery programs. Demand reinvestment in and the expansion of public housing, ensuring that all have a decent house to live in. And we got 841 here at thevoiceofstockton.org and kxvs.org, and going out over Facebook and YouTube. We're looking at the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. They demand a public infrastructure projects and sustainable, community-based and controlled economic initiatives that target poor urban and rural communities, demand fair and decent housing for all, and the end of rolling back of fair housing projects, demand relief from crushing household, student, and consumer debt. We declare Jubilee, forgiveness of debts. That's in Leviticus 25. We demand that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share of our country's urgent needs around decent and affordable housing, free public education, a robust safety net, and Social Security. Woo! This has been covered. The Poor People's Campaign demands the repeal of the 2017 federal tax law and the reinvestment of those funds into public programs. Demand that the nation and our lawmakers turn immediate attention to passing policies and budget allocations that would end child poverty. Public hearing on federal and state institutions charged with child safety and protection, including how their resources are used to take children away from their parents rather than strengthening families. The official poverty measure. To narrow a definition of poverty today is an income-based measure developed in the 1960s that uses the federal poverty line to define poverty. In 2016, that was $11,880 for a single person under the age of 65 and was $24,300 for a household of 4. Boy, oh boy. Oh, man, you're not even making rent with that income. In 2016, 12.7% of the U.S. population, 40.6 million people, were poor. Nearly 30%, or 95 million, were low income. That's defined as living at least living at less than twice the poverty line. Yeah, 95 million. Wow, there's 325 million in the whole country. The supplemental poverty measure takes into account income as well as the costs of food, clothing, housing, and utilities in government programs that have assisted low-income families and individuals who are not otherwise designated as poor. Now, using the supplemental poverty measure, 140 million people were poor or low income in 2016. Now, existing data from the supplemental poverty measure for 2016, the 140 million people, of those people, 52% were children under the age of 18, 41% of the adults were between 18 to 64. 43% of our elders over age 65 are poor. 45% of women and girls. 34% of white people. 61% of black people. Nearly 2/3 of Latino. 41% of Asian people. First Nations, Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and disabled people. Inadequate information exists on their status. 1/4 of Native Americans were living before the federal poverty line. 27% of people with disabilities were below the federal poverty line. Transgender experience poverty rate double that of the general population. The Poor People's Campaign demands a change in the current poverty standards. Demand accurate assessment of who is poor based on access to decent and adequate housing, among others. Demand particular attention be paid to First Nations, Native Americans, Alaskan Native, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and disabled people. Since this gets into prison and detention. Since 1976, federal spending on prisons has increased tenfold to $7,500,000,000 per year. The number of sentenced state and federal inmates grew from 188,000 in 1968, that's 50 years ago, when the population was about 205 million, to nearly 1,500,000 in 2016. So you're looking at half again the number of people, but about 7-fold increase in inmates. 2/3 of these inmates are people of color, while Native Americans are incarcerated at a rate 38% higher than the national average. Counties with fewer than 250,000 people are where the prisons get built. 1970 to 2014, total female jail population and prison population increased 14-fold. More than 80% of those women were in there for nonviolent offenses. 95% of the growth in the incarcerated population since 2000 is a result of an increased number of unconvicted defendants. That is, people unable to make bail. There are inequalities for black and brown people and poor white people in the criminal justice system. Demand equality and safety for all persons regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity when incarcerated. Now we're getting into water. Federal assistance to local water systems is currently 74% below its peak in 1977. This has contributed to the inability of public water utilities to address failing and aging infrastructure. It's prompted utilities to privatize their water systems. Even though private water utilities charge 59% more per unit of water than publicly owned systems. Nearly 12% of U.S. households face unaffordable water bills. Tens of thousands each year get their water shut off, resulting in homelessness, child removal, a host of medical problems. At least 4 million families with children are being exposed to high levels of lead from drinking water and other sources. Poor rural communities face the additional problem of lacking access to piped water and sewage systems. 20 counties with the highest percentage of households lacking access to complete plumbing. All were rural. And 13 had a majority of Native American or Alaskan Native population. That's why the census is important. It checks for things like that. Failing infrastructure in poor cities and rural counties across the country has been a boom in infrastructure support to support fossil fuel production and transportation. Fracking has driven U.S. domestic oil and gas production since 2007. It's demanded an expanded pipeline infrastructure crisscrossing the country. These often pass through or near poor communities, including First Nations, Native American, and Alaskan Native communities, whose resources and lands continued to be exploited and turned over to private interests, including the opening of public lands to extractive industries. In the past 20 years, there have been 5,712 significant oil and or gas leaks or ruptures on U.S. pipelines. Since 1964, that's 54 years, more than 2,400 spills from offshore drilling have occurred in U.S. waters. The Deepwater Horizon and the BP spill in 2010 down there off the, in the Gulf accounted for 95% of the oil spilled in the past 50 years. Also, 1,100 coal ash sites throughout the country. Toxins from those gradually leak into water bodies and groundwater. Oh, once in a while they get released in catastrophic spills. Yum, yum. We know this is warming the planet. It only makes sense. Natural gas is from the Mesozoic. Coal is from the preceding era. That's the Ordovician and such like, the Carboniferous. And that was a period of about 375 million to 200 million years ago, and then the Mesozoic started around 200 million years ago and went to 65 million years ago. Then the age of mammals has been going since the close of the Mesozoic. I think that's the Paleozoic, I'm not sure, but the important thing is natural gas is from the Mesozoic. Oil is basically been created over the past 65 million years. So you extract oil out of the ground, you turn around and burn it. It took nature, and we're doing that at a phenomenal rate. Each one of those, we're taking it out of the ground and turning around and burning it at rates at least 100,000 times faster than nature put it in the ground. It's a simple formula. Total known quantities over annual extractions. And, the total known quantities. For coal, it took 175 million years to get that coal in the ground. For natural gas, it took 130 million years. For oil, 65 to 70 million years to put it in the ground. And you take the annual rate of extraction over the known quantities, and you get that, if we take 1/400th of all the coal out of the ground each year, for instance, and it took 175 million years to put the coal in the ground, oh man. You're getting close to a 1,000,000 to 1 ratio, or at least 500,000. You're taking what nature took 500,000 years to take out of the ground, put in the ground. Man takes out in 1 year and turns around and burns. So you have, in 1 year, we're putting back into the atmosphere 500,000 years worth of carbon. In the case of coal, if the rates are the production over known reserves is actually that high. And that's a fool's paradise. There's going to be absolute repercussions. You're going to reheat the atmosphere. Plants have been kindly taking carbon, and animals, when they die, do take out carbon from the atmosphere. And, but nature does it much slower than man takes it out and burns it. So that's why we got global warming. We got 8:57 here at the Voice of Stockton. We're going over what the Poor People's Campaign is about. They demand 100% clean, renewable energy and public jobs program to transition to a green economy that will put millions of people in sustainable living wage jobs. Fully funded public water and sanitation infrastructure that keeps these utilities and services under public control and that prioritize poor, rural, and native communities that have been harmed by polluting and extractive industries. They demand a ban on fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, coal ash ponds, offshore drilling. Demand a ban on all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals. Time to protect public lands. An immediate cessation of opening up public lands for polluting and extractive industries. Now getting to the war economy and militarism. 53 cents of every federal discretionary dollar goes to military spending, and only 15 cents is spent on anti-poverty programs. The current administration wants that go up to 66 cents by 2023 and down to 12 cents for the anti-poverty. The Department of Defense obligated more money on federal contracts than all other federal agencies combined, and that was $274 billion. The CEOs of the top 5 military contractors earned an average of $19,200,000 each, more than 90 times the $214,000 earned by a U.S. general, and 640 times the $30,000 earned by U.S. privates in combat. More than 68% of the civilian casualties in 2017 from aerial attacks were women and children. Nearly half of female military personnel sent to Iraq or Afghanistan reported being sexually harassed, and nearly 25% said they had been sexually assaulted. In 2012, suicide claimed more military deaths than military action. As of September 2017, that was 9 months ago, an average of 20 veterans died by suicide every day. The DoD was responsible for 72% of the U.S. government's total greenhouse gas emissions in 2016. City police departments are getting military weapons and equipment. The war on drugs and drug policy have become an excuse to bring military-grade weapons and equipment to local communities and arm local police to look like soldiers in combat. Young black males and Native Americans are more likely to be killed by police than other racial groups. From 1968, 50 years ago, to 2 years ago, there were 1,600,000 gun deaths in the United States. Let's see. That makes it about 30,000 a year. U.S. homicide rates were 7 times higher than in other high-income countries. It is 9:01 p.m. You are webtuned to the Voice of Stockton. It is the Saturday Evening News. We're learning what the Poor People's Campaign is about. This is at poorpeoplescampaign.org. Federal spending on immigration, deportations, and the border has increased from $2 billion in 1976 to $17 billion in 2015. Immigrant detentions from 93 to 2013 increased from 85,000 to 441,000 per year. Complaints of abuse have been filed against immigration and customs enforcement more than any other department of Homeland Security. LGBTQIA immigrants are 15 times more likely to experience sexual assault and confinement than other immigrants held in detention, and 21.6% of immigrant children are impoverished. National morality. Moral justifications over our U.S. history have been offered for the genocide and enforced removal of indigenous people from their lands, slavery, resisting the Brown versus Board of Education school segregation case, and opposing the Roe v. Wade abortion case. Religious extremists focus on issues like prayer and school, abortion, and gun rights that distort national moral narrative. In 2016, Franklin Graham invested $10 million of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association's money in the Decision of America tour. It was billed as nonpartisan. After Trump's, Franklin Graham called Trump's victory an answer to prayer. Court Evangelicals Values Voters Summit has become an important focus point for this coalition and narrative. Through federal contracts and student aid, Liberty University has become the largest private Christian university in the country. Now, these influences have also ignored moral commitments enshrined in the U.S. Constitution to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. More than 250,000 people die in the United States from poverty and related issues every year. "50 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King and many others called for a revolution of values in America. The triplets of evil, stand against them: militarism, racism, and economic injustice. They sought to build a broad fusion coalition that would audit America. Together they would demand an accounting of promissory notes that have been returned marked insufficient funds. People impacted by systemic racism, poverty, and ecological devastation, the war economy, and our distorted moral narrative have said the same thing. We want to be free. We need a poor people's campaign. They look to Isaiah 58. The Quran, the believers, both men and women, are in charge of and responsible for one another. They all enjoin the doing of what is right and forbid the doing of what is wrong. From Luke 4, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And continuing, Constitution, 14th Amendment, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Real social change has come when those most impacted by social injustice have joined hands with allies of goodwill to stand together to transform and better society. These efforts, women's suffrage, labor and civil rights, did not simply stand against partisan foes. They stood for the deep moral center of our constitutional values and faith traditions. The power concedes nothing without a fight, and that in the end, love is the greatest power to sustain a fight for what is right. Silence was betrayal. We're coming together to break the silence, tell the truth about interlocking evils. By exploiting and excluding people economically, we are emboldened to abuse our military powers and through violence and war control resources. This quest for the control of resources leads to the potential destruction of our entire ecosystem and everything living in it. The current moral narrative of our nation both justifies this cycle and distracts us from it. Revival is necessary today. We come to remind our nation that truths we hold to be self-evident and what values we hold dear. We draw on the histories of resistance that echo their truth down through the centuries and the power of the blood that has been shed through generations of struggle. We loudly proclaim that we will move forward together, not one step back. Then there's a join the campaign. Okay, that's what they're about. There's a learn, audit, history, arts and culture. There's actions. That's audit souls of poor folk. There's June 23rd. And Yeah, this is the audit. And Souls of Poor Folks traces the 50 years since 68. And Broken-Hearted Freedom Church of the Poor gathered by the thousands in Washington. 50 years later, Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Souls of Poor Folk is an empirical study that brings us towards an honest confrontation with our own history. How our path has unfolded since 68 and how our nation trembles today for lack of moral vision. It summons our highest moral aspirations and diagnoses our deepest natural ailments over 5 decades. Draws on academic research and also testimonies of human beings battered by harmful public policies. Nothing can be changed until it is faced, said James Baldwin. Nearly half of our population cannot afford a $400 emergency, which presents a structural crisis of national proportion that ties poverty to things like health care and housing. The struggle of humanity against entrenched power is the struggle of memory over forgetting. Our victories in the timeless cause of love and democracy have always required the devotion of thousands of ordinary people, local communities, grassroots groups, prophetic churches, and organizing traditions. They have the full report on the Institute for Policy Studies site, or download the PDF to the right. All righty. Let's see. Now we got something in history. Dr. King's vision, the Poor People's Campaign of 1967-68. Arts and culture is music, poetry, visual arts, and film for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. All works are free to use and distribute as long as the artists are credited. That's good. These are good things. Oh, we got 913. So, alrighty, folks, that's a look at the Poor People's Campaign. You can join it and be heavily involved. It's a great thing, and I'm glad to bring it to you. And this is all at poorpeoplescampaign.org, and they got phone numbers there, and you can join up and really get into the organization and spread it to your friends, relatives, and your local organizations that you deal with. All righty. Back here, and let's check where we're at on the audition. Yep, getting up to the end. It's been a pleasure bringing you the show this evening. A single theme, the Poor People's Campaign, but it's an ongoing revival, if you will, that you can be involved in and help yourself and a lot of others out, because economy and politics are tied together as much as economy and whatever work you do. So that's being industrious. You also got to be political. That's part of the game and being an American. So thoughts for the evening. Thanks for listening. Be with you tomorrow and be with you next week. And listen always to the voice of Stockton, This has been the Saturday Evening News with your host, Richard Slezak. All righty. Got our hour in, and I'm going to go over here to the oh, wait a minute. Next, I need to do the shutdown on the YouTube and Facebook. Thanks for watching. And again, tomorrow we got the Islam show and many shows here on, coming to you over Facebook and YouTube, coming to you from the John Moriarty studio. That is the voiceofstockton.org and kxvs.org. And exiting out. Have a good evening.